Full Contact. In association with Mitsubishi Motors, drive your ambition.
Hello, welcome to Brian Moore's Full Contact in association with the Telegraph and Mitsubishi Motors. Well, the 2019 Rugby World Cup is now a matter of history, and congratulations to South Africa, who produced a completely dominant performance in the final to see off England 32 points to 12 in Tokyo last Saturday morning. England head coach Eddie Jones said after the defeat that he couldn't put his finger on what went wrong with his side, but I'm sure that Kyran and I will be able to offer at least a few pointers. Whether or not he feels irrelevant will be another matter. I mean, the result came a week after his players put in arguably their best performance under Jones against New Zealand. So, was it a case of peaking too soon? Is that an actual concept? We'll also discuss how it was that South Africa saved probably their best performance for the final. The win caps an incredible 24 months in charge for their head coach Rassie Erasmus, who took them, well, they were down and out with very few people giving them any chance, and now they sit atop the world stage of rugby. They are world champions, and deservedly so. It was a clean sweep at the Rugby Awards on Sunday night following the win, and we'll be speaking to the former Springbok captain and World Cup winner Bob Skinstad about what he expects the win to do, not only for South African rugby but for the country as a whole. Refereeing, well, that was a major talking point at this year's tournament. Jerome Garces was criticised by some, not me, after his performance at the weekend, and we'll be speaking to the former international referee Jonathan Kaplan about what he thought of Garces' performance and the standard of refereeing as a whole over the last 7 weeks. Alongside me today to discuss all this is 2003 World Cup winner and former Saracens and England scrum half Kyran Bracken. Hi, Kyran.
How you doing, Brian? Good to see you.
Before I say anything, let me put this straight on the table. South Africa were worthy winners by a good way. They beat England in virtually every discipline on that. That said, do you think England, to what extent, if any, made their job easier?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, to say that I just felt they just seemed off kilter. They just didn't seem themselves, and I don't know whether that was the bus being late, but from the very off, it seemed to be a carbon copy of the way New Zealand approached England the week before. They were off kilter, and there was just something not quite right. But England were doing very unusual things, throwing the ball behind their own post, missing touch, which was unusual, or kicking straight out, knocking on quite a lot. And it was, as you know, at international level, when you make a mistake and then you compound it with another mistake and another mistake. And then it came to the scrummaging. Now, people talk about Carl Sinclair and what a difference that made. I'm not entirely sure whether it made too much difference, other than Carl Sinclair around the pitch is clearly a lot better player. He can be coming as a first receiver. He's got lovely hands. But as a scrummager, I just read some stories about South Africans were really looking forward to the scrum because they really felt they had an opportunity to go at Carl Sinclair and the England scrum. And also the fact that the South African scrummage, especially the front row, were used to playing 45 minutes each, as opposed to England, where they put the front line up and they'd play for 60, 70 and then bring other people on. I mean, obviously Dan Cole wasn't quite ready for a full match. We all know that. And we were taking a part in the scrum, but it wasn't just the scrum. We were taking a part in the air. Now, normally when England kick, we tend to get the ball back. You'll remember almost every kick that went up in the air, Faf de Klerk or Pollard, the wingers seemed to catch it and get the ball back and keep the ball. So we lost the aerial battle. We made a lot of mistakes. We compounded those mistakes. We looked nervous and we lost the physicality. And for me, it was, to some extent, it looked like, and it feels like, a real feeble excuse, which is why I don't think Eddie Jones is quite prepared to come out and say that. But I think the mindset wasn't quite right. I half felt that, and it's hard when you've had such a great win like that. It's hard the following week to back it up, because when you beat the best team in the world, you have arguably the best performance ever. then you're reading the papers, you're looking at your own performances, everyone's talking about everyone getting MBEs, you're talking about a bus ride, open top bus, meeting the Queen, MBEs, and somewhere along the line, I'm not saying they said, right, we've won it, it's going to be easy, but the fear factor is certainly nothing like it would have been against New Zealand as it would be against South Africa, and therefore I'd be interested in time to come out about the psychologists who came on board and how they managed the expectations. But when I listened to the South Africans talking the week before the game, they were talking about they needed to play the best they'd ever played, and with England it was all about almost, well, we're going to get better. It wasn't about how good South Africa are.
Could you perhaps paraphrase it in this way? It's a different mindset to say, look, we need to do this again. If we do this again, we're a better team, we've got more attacking options, things will come right, and all things being equal, we should win. Rather than thinking, if we don't get this absolutely right in every area, we are going to lose. And not only are we going to lose, we could lose badly. And there's a big difference in the two.
There's a massive difference.
And the thing is, it will not be until they look back and they've had, it may take a couple of years actually, for them to reflect and think, actually, that wasn't quite my mindset. I was in a different place. Not that I was blasé consciously, not that I assumed we wouldn't win, not that I felt it was a God-given right, but I tell you what, I wasn't absolutely desperate like I was before the semi-final. No,
I agree with you. I think you have to understand. And look, my first game was against New Zealand way back in 1993, playing with yourself, and Jamie Joseph stood on my ankle, and the rest is history. We won the game, and it was fantastic. And I think the odds for us winning the Grand Slam just around the corner were very high, and we were the number one team, and we got beaten by Ireland, first time in 20 years. So you have a mindset, and I know there were a few months apart, but this is different. It's very hard when you have a mindset when you're playing against the best team in the world. Clearly the All Blacks almost thought they were in the final as well, didn't they, to some extent? And their mindset wasn't quite right. And so you inquire as to why. But I just think the South Africans, they had a tough semi-final against Wales. They just scraped through, and they saw what England did, and they're all saying, geez, we're going to lose this unless we are at our best. And I remember the World Cup semi-final where we played against France, my last game for England, and we beat them convincingly, especially at scrum time. And Martin Johnson said, look, forget about that. This is a different game. We're playing against Australia, beating the All Blacks. These guys know how to play in their own backyard. Just put that all behind you guys, right? It's not going to be the same final. We've got to start again. And we didn't have psychologists, but Martin Johnson, Clive Woodward said, one game at a time, don't think you've won it. And I think we as the press as well, the reason I was reading the paper, it was all about the celebration of winning. It was never about, geez, we might not win. You tell me who in the English press and only the papers said that South Africa are going to win.
I can't name any. I didn't say they were going to win, but I did say in my review of the front rows, there are 4 front rows in this.
Yeah.
The starters and the finishers, or whatever you call them, and they're all quite good. But I've got this thing: the South African scrum is more pivotal to the way they play their game than it is to England. Yeah. England will be looking and be quite happy to get parity there and then be allowed to go around the field. Yeah. South Africans need and will want their scrum to be on top because that gives them all sorts of other edges. And Let's get into this scrummage. I'll ask you your point of view. The scrum is unique in this sense. It is a direct physical battle. Yeah. It's not about technique necessarily like lineouts are, and you can't. And the thing is, you can't swap them round. You're going to pack down in the same position against the same person, and that's it. You can't avoid it. No. And when it goes wrong, because it's such a, for want of a better word, I can't think of a better one, a macho thing. When you are being humiliated and pushed backwards, psychologically, it is devastating.
You are right. It's a massive...
What's it like as a back?
Never mind being a back. What's it like as a scrum half? There's nothing worse when you're putting that ball in and you can just sense, because when you're getting the ball going backwards, trying to get the ball out, honestly, is a nightmare. And something that we talked earlier is about something that England weren't able to do is do a channel one. You see, when you're struggling in the scrum, an easier way is get the hooker to sort of unleash his bind a little bit, turn to the left and hook it straight into the number 8's hands. So by the time they start pushing, the ball's gone. So they weren't able to do that, and that's interesting to see why that's not been done. So I don't see it much done in the professional game anymore.
No, because technically they can't do it.
Why not?
Because they're not taught to do it, and they don't feel it's necessary. It's something, and that's when you see Japan. They can do that because they're always under pressure.
Absolutely. So,
but the other thing, Kyran, is you can't do that on their ball when they double shoot.
Oh no, of course not. Well, of course not. No, and a lot of the penalties were on the South African ball, and England were lucky to get some of them away. But when you talk about a psychological blow, you're completely right. But it also is a psychological blow when they're in areas of the pitch. You don't mind losing a penalty in their 22, but a lot of the important penalties were given in England's half, which hadn't happened in the tournament. But from a psychological blow, I just remember, and I've seen you a lot of the time, from your point of view, Brian, when you were with England, and every international I saw, the pack would all come together, and the one thing they'd talk about more than anything would be the scrum. And they talk about how they're going to have a double shove and how they're going to dominate that area, and how they're going to work together and push together, because they knew that it's almost like a tally. I remember seeing front rows coming in feeling chuffed even though they lost because they won all the scrums.
But for all those reasons, Kyran.
Yeah.
And the other thing is this, what it does is, say the other side spill the ball, knock the ball on, in contact or whatever, drop the ball, forward pass it. That is supposed to be, you get the scrum, your advantage, you get the ball back and you play on.
Yeah.
If you're under pressure, their mistake turns into a potential for them to get 3 points if it's in kicking distance.
Absolutely.
And that means when you're in the loose and you're handling, there's a certain sort of nervousness, because you know, if I spill the ball, if I don't do this right, not only will I give the ball away, it might cost us 3 points as well. So every time you knock the ball on, you're thinking, oh God, that might be 3 points.
That's 3
and of
points,
course the pack is then thinking, we've got to defend this, and the opposition are thinking, we're going to get points here.
Yeah, but out of interest though, I mean, I know it was very stark in the game in the final, but why wasn't it so important in many of the other games necessary for South Africa? I know Wales took a scrum on their line, and I know they did it with Channel 1, didn't they? Got the ball out pretty quickly, but it was never influential as much, certainly in the South Africa game against New Zealand, partly because New Zealand don't knock it on that much. Yeah, but there were so many errors.
Because I am absolutely certain that they targeted this area and said, this is one area where we can actually get an advantage, but not just in a small advantage. We can really make a big statement. And for all the reasons we've just been through, that will have knock-on effects, really serious, good for us, really deleterious, really bad for them.
Yeah, two questions then. I heard that Rassie Erasmus did say after the game he thought that the England front row would be very, very tired because they were used to playing their first frontline players up to 65, 70 minutes and bringing on the rest for 10 minutes, whereas he specifically made sure his players played because they did the replacements at 42 minutes. I thought, well, that was a bit odd. 42 minutes brought on a new front row. So what do you make of that?
They have got two front rows that are virtually equal in terms of scrimmaging ability. I think the first choice probably have a bit more mobility. Marks is an exception probably at hooker, but they're all really good scrummagers.
Yeah.
And they're all really good ball carriers in a very direct way. They're all committed in the tight. And of course, what happened was, because England couldn't, and they struggled a little bit in the line out then as well, because they couldn't get set ball which was of any quality, they couldn't impose the game plan, because I always said it was imperative that England did not make the tackle the one-on-one hits where people like Du Toit and Vermeulen could come in and be one-man wrecking balls, either winning penalties or slowing ball down. And because they couldn't get the set ball on the terms they wanted, they couldn't get the loose ball carried in the way they wanted.
No, yeah, absolutely.
It turned then into very much like the Wales game, where it was very attritional, and South Africa were just far more physical around the breakdown. England couldn't get over the gain line. When they tried to move wide, they didn't do it well. there were lots of passes which were atypically inaccurate. Kicking was inaccurate, and so on, and it just compounded. And in the end, they ended up looking as bereft of ideas as New Zealand did against them, when it wasn't a case of not having plan B, it was a case of not even being able to get on the board with plan A, and then thinking, well...
There was timing. There was a knock on, then there was a penalty, and then there was a kick off, and then there was another knock on, and then there was a straight out, and then everything goes against you, and the timing's all off. But do you know what was really interesting? At 35 minutes, it was still 6-all, and I thought, how are England
I didn't know
still
how
in this game? I mean, how were they still in this game? And then they gave away 2 very cheap penalties to go in at 12-6 at half time. But when they come out, I thought they'd make changes. You're right. What England needed is they just wanted to build phases. They wanted to build phases and get quick ball. And what it meant was, because they didn't have that foundation in the scrum at least, then they were struggling and then panicking. Absolutely panicking. We hadn't seen them panic in the World Cup. No. But my question really to you is, to some extent, and it's been mentioned before, is there a soft underbelly with leadership and with this England team? We saw what happened against Scotland. We've seen where 31 up and then suddenly it's a draw, and we don't know how to combat a side who's running amok. And the question is, and we've seen before that, them lose massive big games. Are there enough leaders in this team, and is there a soft underbelly?
I tell you what's interesting about that. Again, in the Six Nations games against Wales and Scotland, they actually were playing well, then it went against them, and then they couldn't arrest it.
Yeah.
The problem with this game, it didn't go well from the start.
No, it didn't, no.
And you've mentioned this. What infuriates coaches, captains and everyone else is when you finally do register a score, and they weren't in the game at all for 30-odd minutes, and as you say, somehow they were level. When they actually registered one, they'd either not deal with the restart properly, or a penalty was given away.
Yeah.
And then you're thinking, God, of all the things you shouldn't have done, we shouldn't have done, that was the one. We all we needed was another 5 minutes of flat time to bed that score in, and the psychology changes a little bit.
Yeah.
But you still come back to the fact that every time there is a scrum on your ball or their ball, every time there's a knock on, every time there's a restart, you're thinking, oh God, we are potentially going to get embarrassed again. We're potentially going to give a free kick.
I know you love bringing it back to the scrum.
Well,
I know you are right.
On this occasion, it was absolutely seminal.
No, I agree.
And I just want to stress again why it is so different to any other facet of the game, because you can't change it.
Yeah,
you can't have short scrums.
What about that? Okay, but let's just say the line out was. Let's just say the scrum went okay and there was parity. The other big weapon they had, and I've seen them use it immensely, is in the driving maul, and that's scary when they get that right. I mean, unless you take it down early or whatever. But England dealt with that quite well, I thought. They
dealt with most of them. Yeah, they get.
But you saw them in some of the other matches, very hard to defend against. Yeah. But it's interesting, that the scrum is becoming more important, and like you say, psychologically it was massive, but add that to the mistakes that they made, and then they compounded each mistake by another one very soon after, and then couldn't get momentum, and then couldn't change, but they were still within the fight. Even 6 points is nothing, going into half time.
But they come back to this point, and you have to, because it was so germane. Normally, even had they made those mistakes, that would have meant they turned the ball over and the other side got the ball back to play with from the scrum. Yeah. It wouldn't necessarily have meant them facing a penalty kick stood between their own posts, which is unfortunately what happened. Anyway, we will go on about this quite a lot more.
Hello there, Telegraph podcast listener. My name is Tom Gibbs and I'm the host of our Audio Football Club podcast. If your desire for top football chat isn't sated, then may I please recommend the Telegraph's very own podcast about that subject. Audio Football Club comes out every single Monday and it features some of the best and brightest football minds in the country, taking in all the biggest stories from the Premier League and around Europe. Search for Audio Football Club wherever you get your podcasts or follow the link in the description of this episode. Good things will happen to you if you do so.
Why don't we speak to someone who will be very chipper, I imagine. He is a co-host here regularly. He's a very valued contributor. Bob Skinstad, the 2007 Rugby World Cup winner with South Africa, joins us. Hello, Bob.
Brian, how are you, my friend?
well, not in the same mood as you are, mate, I'll tell you. We've been going on about scrums, and I didn't. I apprehended that they might be important, not quite as important as they turned out to be. Do you think that prior to the game, South Africa had any special regard for this part of the game, whether this was part of their overall plan, the inordinate pressure that they put on England?
Look, I think it's a combination of two factors. One, I definitely think they over-prepared the scrum area. And that's a number of things. Peter Steph du Toit on the flank, bigger, stronger, faster guy, 3 lock-sized men in the second row, etc. That was huge. They definitely wanted to defend our loose head side going backwards when England were on the attack, because we've seen how effective that is. When once they freed up, especially with a Vunipola over the line, etc., and then the quick ball around the corner, as I think Eddie Jones called it. That was the one thing. So they were prepared for a big counter already. And then I genuinely believe, and these things happen and I really feel sorry for him and the team because of it, but I genuinely believe the Kyle Sinclair injury was the start of the turn. I think he's been exceptional this whole tournament. And, we saw how much loose play work he did in the quarters and the semis. And I think it was a big ask for Dan Cole to stand up and be that. And then, unfortunately, South Africa's preparation that we just spoke about packed their front row again and just brought on 35 minutes of fresh legs for that second half. So they were always going to buckle under that kind of pressure.
But Bob, we were talking earlier on about mindsets going into the game, and you were here and then you got out. I don't know what access you had in and around the camp, but did you get any can you give us any sort of insight into the mindset of them going in, what their basic beliefs, their thoughts were prior to the game?
I can, Brian. Rassie Erasmus is very astute. Technically, we've already covered that. You and I are talking about his role at Munster and some of the stuff he'd done in sort of Super Rugby teams and Currie Cup, etc. I think his masterstroke on this one was on strategy. It's fine to be very good at driving mauls and to make sure that your scrums are intact, but he played this whole World Cup out perfectly. I think what he did was he built the team into one that believed in themselves, but believed they were having to take on the whole world. So England were representative of everything that they needed to overcome. And I genuinely believe, unfortunately for England, that they played, let's call it their hand, if it's a big card game, they played their hand poorly by becoming the team to beat. The week that was backed up by the media, on every piece of literature that the Springboks could read or look at, they were being written off as the team who were going to lose the final. And I really believe that fueled the fire. And I know Rassie used that as his touch paper to light that fire. So I think that was very, very good from him. And I felt it. I was with the team 2 days before the semi-final, which was going to be tough. I was with them after the victory, and I just saw the resolve, I saw the resilience, and I saw the fairy tale playing out that they were starting to believe. So it was an incredible stroke of luck, stroke of genius, stars aligning, call it whatever you want, but it worked in South Africa's favour. I think their humility in that victory and the way they thanked everybody is reminiscent for me of great sort of champions that are looking back at all the opponents they've taken on, taking on board what they've contributed to the clash, etc., and thanking them, because I think they built this whole story in their mind from a long way before we realised.
Bobby, myself and Brian were in the 95 World Cup and we watched Francois Pienaar lift the World Cup with the number 6 on his back with Nelson Mandela. Lots been made of Kolisi's background and first black captain. I mean, from our point of view and just watching, I almost shed a tear when I saw him lifting the cup. thinking, wow, what a story, couldn't feed himself, get himself to school, and his family tragedies. I mean, what's the reaction like back in South Africa, and how big is it, you think, as a momentous occasion? Is it bigger than the Francois Pienaar 95 win?
Well, I'm always loath to say that because that was the first fairy tale, but I think you're so right. I mean, I think it is bigger because, we talk about racial reintegration, racial separation in South Africa, how much politics has got a role to play in sport in South Africa, all the things that have gone wrong about South Africa all the time. And now they've got a chance to talk about something right. And it doesn't mean that it's just black people or black sportsmen who can say that, but the whole of South Africa can say, well, actually, we've been trying really hard. Overnight success takes 20 years. You can't just build a sort of an army of young black rugby players without first inspiring them like Francois did, and then, working with them like all the coaches and the senior players did over the years, and then actually manifesting it into a World Cup. I mean, I just think about everything that this team had to go through and realize how much they had to, how many Everests they had to climb, Some of the stuff has come out in the media the last 2 days about Rassie and Sia having conversations, about, I'm going to appoint you the captain of this team, but because I want you to take him to the World Cup. And Sia going, jeepers, all I wanted to do was be a rugby player. I haven't even thought that far. What do you mean? And then suddenly it dawning on it that this Afrikaans white coach believed that he could be the guy to lift the Rugby World Cup in Japan, and then him buying into the journey and that whole process of making that apparent and that story work for all the players in the team. So it's incredible. I think it's one of the most important sporting moments that I've ever witnessed.
Bob, one of the things I've discussed with you previously is the question of racial integration and so on. From my point of view, was this: you are missing out if you do not include as many potential black rugby players as you can on a whole heap of athletic talent. And when you've seen them now coming through, and you're right, you can't just do it overnight because they've got to learn the game and all sorts of other things. But going forward for South Africa, and this is not a gripe in a conventional sense, when the game was virtually won and you see them starting to cut loose and letting their creative talents come, how much more do you think there is to come?
Oh, Brian, I mean, if we can open the tap properly, and get the young black African kids, who see these images on TV and newspaper, etc., getting access to quality fields, coaching, environments, and that's the difficult part. We've seen, through some work that I've done with not only Gary Kirsten Cricket Foundation, but also what John Smith does to put back into rugby, the foundational structures of sport are sort of school and club, and they just haven't been there, But Saru over the years have put time and effort into it. A lot of the schools have really said, community development work, etc. So I just hope that this could be the glue that can put those together. I think we've wasted a lot of money in South Africa on a million different competitions. I've seen now the teams coming and playing some rugby in Northern Hemisphere, perhaps. A bigger focus on that means that the kids who see teams don't see 20 different teams. They see one or two, senior teams taking part in these competitions, and their feeder systems get them there. I think if we've opened the taps, then there is so much more talent to come. And to be honest, I've got to doff the cap to Rassie Erasmus, Makazole Mpimpi, Sibo Nkosi, these kind of players. He went out to those schools years ago and said, let's get them through the system. I want to see the guys of colour who are fast and who are strong and don't know rugby yet, and I want to teach them the game. And, there they are scoring tries and winning the World Cup final.
Well, a frightening prospect for everyone else, but no, I look like that. Just hope that the tap is now fully open. You must be on top of the world, or whatever you want to say. Bob, it's good to speak to you. Well done, mate.
You too, my mate. Listen, and I think I've got to remind everybody that South Africa said thank you so much to to England for not only that game, but the way that they changed the standard of World Rugby in a competition like that by their demolition of the All Blacks in the semi-finals. I think those two games have shown us what rugby could be if it's played exceptionally well. So delighted, guys, but reminiscent that everybody else takes part in World Rugby too.
Good to speak to you, mate. Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Eddie Jones, it looks as though, I mean, you know Eddie very well. You club coached by him as well. Looks like his tenure is going to stay on. I wrote this. Ultimately, sport is a very brutal yardstick. You win, you lose. If you don't win, you fail. And you can't sugarcoat that. That's what he set out to do. He came very close. One of the most exceptional performances, as you say, I've ever seen an England team play in the semi-final, but failure is the ultimate verdict on the campaign. What now?
What now? There's a lot of talk about what he's going to do, and it seemed a bit cruel. I think David Flatterman asked him straight away, "Are you leaving your post, or what are you going to do straight after the game?" And he said, "Mate, wait till the morning, but I'm going to have a few beers," he says. So rumour has it now, I mean, he has a contract for 2 more years, which seems a bit strange to have a 2-year contract on a 4-year cycle with the World Cup in France. It does seem strange, and now what they're saying, the RFU is saying, who they're thinking now is to give him another couple of years. That's what they've said now. They've come out and said they want to give him a couple more years, do the 4-year cycle. Is that the right thing? It seems strange, though, to give him the 2 years and now after losing ask for another 2 years. But for continuity, I think it's important because he's already said he's going to revamp the team completely. And so you're going to see a lot of people slash from that squad and he's going to start afresh again. Is he the right man to take us forward? Well, I think partly because there's no one else, I'd say yes. I think he's made mistakes on the way. I don't think he got his selection quite right in the World Cup squad, personally. And, he just made some strange choices on the way. He stuck with players for years where we said, why is he sticking with the likes of Chris Robshaw and Mike Brown, and then made changes and then brought people in and out. And the scrum half scenario is really bizarre. Suddenly, Will Hines from nowhere suddenly on the World Cup doesn't take another scrum half in case. Listen, he's got a great record in the World Cup, so who are we to argue? But some of the things he's done are strange. But I think for continuity, he got us to World Cup final a year ago or 2 years ago even as well. We'd have taken that all day long. Yeah, we would have taken that all day long. We were not competing at the highest level. Remember, we had 5 matches on the trot. We were lost. We went to South Africa, lost. We couldn't buy a win. So within a year, we're in a World Cup final. We lost, but we lost badly, and badly partly because of the players' fault, but also I think he's got to take some cop for the coaching.
It's an interesting thing, though, when you're talking about a completely revamped team, because if you look at the demographic in the team, bar 1 or 2, and it is about as few as that. Yeah, all these players will be within the range of playing in World Cups. None of them will be particularly old. Some of them, a lot of the players who are 24, 25 should, all things being equal, be at the very top of their game. They'll have considerable experience. They'll have considerably more experience internationally and in club games, sorting all these problems out. So the thought of it being slashed completely I can't see that.
He's been pretty brutal, though, hasn't he? He's pretty brutal. He's already said he's going to change this squad, warts and all. He's going to go for it. He's going to revamp the squad. But you're right, when you look at a lot of the youngest England team ever to be in the final by some way, which players? I mean, I think Farrell will be 32 by the time the next World Cup comes. But a lot of the others will just be around the 29, 30 mark. Yeah, so you'd expect a lot of them still to be around and still competing, but I still think he'll be quite tough and quite brutal and get rid of a few players. There are a few players I was just out of nowhere suddenly got on the reckoning. But the other question is he going to be damaged psychologically, Eddie Jones, personally, from this? Because he said he took 3 or 4 years to get over the 2003 World Cup final, and I think they were the underdogs in that final, and they did ever so well to get us into extra time. Yet now we've got into a final, beat the All Blacks, massive expectations. He thought they'd go out and win it, and they didn't. So Yeah, where does he? Is he capable of taking us forward for another 4 years? I think it's important knowing his emotional state.
One of the things that he managed to get right, and he should have got right as well, because it was the first time since 2003 where the opportunity was there to get the right mix of players and get this immutable statistic of the number of caps you need to win a World Cup, 600 plus.
Yeah.
What England can't afford to do as a union, as a nation, is get out of sync again. So you're in a position where you've only got 300, 400.
Yeah.
There is no reason why, if they do this properly, they shouldn't be like South Africa, like the All Blacks, where they continually get at least that part of it right, because that is the stat that has proved to be absolutely non-negotiable. You have to have that number of caps. No one else has done it. And there's a reason for that, because you can't, because that's important. So, above all, they can't afford to get that wrong.
I'll challenge that a little bit, only in the sense that, all right, I'll ask you a question. Was Ben Cole the right person to be starting that game as a replacement, or do you think someone like Williams should have been there in the first place? So that he obviously went for experience, 90 odd caps. Was it the right call? Is he the best?
That's the problem with taking only 2 tight heads.
Yeah, why did he do that then? So that here's the question about Eddie Jones. He, when he gets it right and wins it, everyone says he's a genius. But why we're allowed to question the players he took? Now, Danny Kerr for me has been playing better than Ben Youngs for some time. Never got the opportunity. He got out on his backside because he challenged Eddie. Why wasn't he starting? Why was he only getting a Japan game without the first team there? And he said, "That's the end of you. We don't want you anymore. You're not part of it. You're not a team man." And I like Ben Youngs for me, cracking player, but he's at the end of his career, and I thought Ben Spencer and Dad Robson were very exciting players, playing very well in the Premiership, and Ben Youngs is probably having his worst year in the Premiership, and suddenly Will Hines from nowhere suddenly comes in. What's the reason for that? And when it comes to the World Cup final, I've always said the most important thing when you've got an England team like they have, you need the quickest passer, right? You need the quickest passer, and Ben Youngs isn't the quickest passer. You look at Aaron Smith and you look at these other players. I mean, Will Hines was better, but you've got other players who are better, and I just found it a bit strange. That were relying on these sort of older players to some extent. And even the Cipriani, I mean, George Ford, to some extent, they say, he never wins the really big, important games. And he was swapping and changing. And anyway, look, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens in the investigation. But we're allowed to ask, aren't we?
Full Contact, in association with Mitsubishi Motors. Everyone's ambitions are different. You can climb to the top, or you could take on uphill battles of a different kind. You can explore for hundreds of miles, or you could begin a bigger journey. You can make time fly, or you could make it stand still. The Mitsubishi SUV range. Drive your ambition.
Why don't we change tack slightly, because I'm very pleased to say we're able now to speak to Jonathan Kaplan, the former international referee, talk to him about a whole host of things. Hello, Jonathan.
Hi, Brian.
I imagine you're in quite a chipper mood as well, but quite rightly so. Look, overall, the standard of refereeing in the tournament, what would you say?
So it started quite shakily. I think there were performances that weren't good enough, not just in respect of the tackle sanction. I think they got a rocket, and as a result, the referee group pulled together, and I think they chose the best referees of the group to do quarterfinals onwards, and there was very little controversy as a consequence.
I mean, one of the things that has now, I think, bedded in is there were fewer concussions in the knockout stages than the previous World Cup. So do you believe that the stance which was taken, it's controversial to some, not to me at the time, was vindicated as a result of that, about the tackle height?
Yeah, so look, either the players adjusted, or the teams were spoken to, certainly the accuracy of the referees appeared to be better, but they had very few decisions to make as the tournament wore on. So, I think the desired result was good for all concerned, for the players who I often feel for, because I don't think the defender has time to adjust in respect of the collision, and for the game of rugby in general, where, it's not good to see this many yellow and red cards, particularly in the high-profile confines of the Rugby World Cup.
What I've said all along is players are very savvy, players are professional, and they're very skilled, and they can adjust to anything they want to. Actually, it's whether they actually want to, or, more importantly, whether from on above, like you're talking about coaches and managers, make it absolutely plain that this is what they require, and then they go away and do it for whatever reason.
I think the TMO helped as well. I think there was. I recall one moment when Nigel Owen, he said play on when there was a high tackle on. I think it was
Lavanini.
Yeah, that's right. And I just like the way the TMO was referred to quite a few times. We're getting so much on VAR and football at the moment, and everyone said they should get rid of it. But actually, I thought they worked really well, the TMO together with the referees, especially in the final and some of the other games as well.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think it's a much maligned profession, and I think the process has been criticised ad nauseum. But I will say, and I agree with you, I think the net result of better communication, of TMO input, was more accurate and better for the game. It almost appeared like they were doing it on the hoof and not slowing the game down, all the time. And the net result was very good for the game, because the one component of what we have, which is good, is that it's a dynamic game and it keeps moving. And you don't want to take too much of that away, otherwise it becomes like NFL, like the gridiron, and it takes 4 hours to complete a game. That's not good for anybody. So I think it's here to stay. It's a good thing that we use technology, and I think this World Cup in particular, the last from perhaps the last few pool games and well into the tournament, right through to the final, where I thought Ben Skeen did very well with a few inputs to Jerome. For example, Anthony Watson knocks the ball on close to the Springbok line. He didn't see it, and obviously the input has come from somewhere else, and that's good for the game. He carried on playing because he didn't see it. England played on, but when he got the correct information, he awarded correctly a scrum to the other team. So
yes, he was, yeah. Can I just ask you about Jerome Garces? A lot of England fans, I'm not one of them, by the way.
No, mate.
Were complaining about it. If you were being picky, the only thing I thought you could have said was, early on, I thought he gave England a little bit of a shorter time to either get off the ball or be on the ball before
Courtney Laws,
Courtney Laws, and etc. etc. Yeah. But that, to me, that had no influence in the long-term result of the game, because South Africa were just dominant in so many areas. Can I just ask you this? I have my own ideas, but for those who are not aware, in the England scrum was penalised. I thought he got one of them wrong only, but then we're all outside the scrum and we don't know, and only the props know, and they're liars, and they won't tell you the truth. But why from outside, if you don't know what the scrum's about, why was he penalising England so frequently?
Yeah, so. I agree with you. I actually said in the Telegraph that I think one of them was too tough and it should have been a reset. I don't think it was it's certainly something that I would have done if I, in slow motion. And there were 6 penalties, I think, to South Africa. One was played on from an advantage, so they actually got 5. I think one of them I would have differed in terms of sanction. And England got 1, and the decision was correct because Kitsov lost his footing, and England, drove forward about 10 metres. So I think what happens with most referees is they look, are the players complying with the calls that the referee is making, because the setup often determines the result of what's going to happen, and I think they did. And then after that, they look for dominance. So should I say legal dominance? And I think in respect of this particular game, and it surprised me as much as anybody else, because I was one of the people that thought England would win comfortably on the back of those previous successes. he rewarded the dominance, and the dominance is the team going forward. If they're doing something illegal, like let's say a tight head cranking the arm of a loose head, or a loose head boring in on the angle, and those type of things would be looked at by the referee. But in respect of the decisions that he made, the first one he didn't actually make. It's very clear that the scrum drops on the far side, so he's got information from an assistant referee. The second one was the one where I thought perhaps there was a reset, because a lot of the players were actually up at the same time. Yeah. And then 3, 4, and 5 to me appeared pretty obvious. The only one where people may say, well, England looked like they had dominance, was a scrum which went round the corner on Joe Marler's side. It's not Joe Marler, as you well know, Brian. It's the back five sometimes dictates the direction of where the scrum goes, and in that particular case, I think that was the story. So. Just to come back to your point about the breakdown, there was another incident where I thought Itoje was over the ball and he should have got a penalty in his favour, as opposed to letting South Africa get the put in at scrum, because he was there first on his feet, dominant tackle, etc. This happens from time to time with referees. It is the one area where you're not going to get 100%, and you're hoping to get as close to 100% as possible. But it's very difficult to determine with accuracy, with clear accuracy in hindsight, whether the ruck has been formed prior to the defender getting his hands on the ball. And you want to, as a referee, encourage a fair contest. You don't want the attack to just have the ball sealing off and have the ball till they make a mistake. The defense is a component of rugby, which should be correctly rewarded. So I don't, like you say, I think South Africa on the day were surprisingly, but they were better, and the score may have blown out a bit at the end, but they were deserving winners, and I don't think the referee helped their cause in any way.
No, I absolutely. Jonathan, thank you very much for that. I want to just stress again, whatever minor niggles you might have, and everyone can have them, because it's a subjective game. And that's the way that the laws are framed purposely, otherwise it wouldn't ever flow. And the fact is that South Africa were better in nearly every aspect, and it would have made no difference, frankly, if some of those penalties had not been given or been given different ways. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me on your show.
Cheers. Kyran, we'll wrap this up very shortly. Just want to say, actually, before we do, congratulations to the England and Saracens centre, Emily Scarratt, who was one of the few players who booked the South African green swathe at the Rugby World Player Award. She was named Women's World Player of the Year on Sunday night. Well done, Emily. Well, let's get you on as a
some good news for a Saracen, for an England Saracen. Can I just say, I was at the weekend. I was at the Saracens against Saracens were playing London Irish, and they had the World Cup booked, the replica World Cup from the RFU, and I was there to sort of have pictures with the World Cup and talk about 2003 and their new generation, their new World Cup winners. So you can imagine no one had a picture with me with the World Cup. So that was tough, but at least it was a good day for Emily Scarratt.
You know what? I over the weekend I was thinking back, and Sunday night I was fairly depressed, but I was never completely confident that England would win, but I did think that if they played their best game, South Africa played their best game, they had more options. In the end, small things make the difference, and when you start the way England started, not just with the fact they were late, but they were inaccurate and so on, then one of your main players goes off, then you find yourself physically being dominated against a side which are absolutely relentless and thoroughly deserved in the end to win. There's not a lot you can do. I don't know what the players feel like. All I would say is that, yes, it will. You may never get over this in the sense that you won't get that 80 minutes back. But from my point of view, the important thing is now that the core of the squad that is talented, that will make the next World Cup, is to make sure that they get into a situation where they are viable challengers again.
No, absolutely. That's the thing now. The players and the core have to remain strong. They're going to get some flat. They're going to come back to the UK. There's going to be no ticket paraders, no meeting the Queen, and it's back to the drawing board for them. But there's a lot in there that they can take. In the cold light of day, that was very good. They played the World Cup extremely well right up until the final. And, in that final, they were schooled in every department. Could they have done it differently? I think what I was disappointed, Brian, about was not the fact that we lost. It was just the way we lost.
I
think
that.
when they're on the plane and they're going back, they can't take anything out of that game that was positive. It's just impossible to. Now, I don't know how you felt in 91 and how you felt losing in that final. It was a much closer final, and this was just something completely different. They didn't give their all. They were unusual, and that's why Eddie Jones says, "I don't know why we played so badly." It's one of those where I do hope they recover quickly, and I hope the public get behind them. It's just that I suppose the furore around winning in the semi-final and playing so well, the expectations were so high.
Well, I'll tell you what, I spoke to Zinzan Brook a few weeks before the tournament started, and Australia had just beaten the All Blacks, and then the All Blacks had got the revenge. Yeah. But he said to me, he said, I looked at that game, he said the All Blacks weren't particularly bad. They were just about 5% under. Yeah. And Australia were absolutely on the money. And he said that turned out to be a score difference of nearly 30 points. And he said, that is now what you're into. Games which might hitherto have been close. If you get it slightly wrong and they get it absolutely right, that can be the winning margin. And this is the case here. England were just slightly under. They couldn't get into what they were doing. And South Africa were absolutely spot on in everything they did. They were determined. They knew what they wanted. They knew how to get it. And they went about and got it. And the result was a drubbing.
And they played that game without actually playing that well in all respects, apart from the last 15 minutes where they scored two tries. Take that away.
Which is why it's frightening, because they've got that aspect to come if they want
to. Absolutely. I mean, here's another way of looking at it, and this might be a bit controversial. If England played South Africa for the next 9 weeks, so after 10 weeks, how many would England win and how many would South Africa win? I reckon England would win 6.
6-4, I was going to say.
6-4. All right, if England played the All Blacks in 10 weeks on the trot, how many would England win?
3.
3 or 4? So on the day, it makes a big difference. And that's the thing, like you say about the 5% or 10% or whatever it is, it does make a difference. On the day, anything can happen, and everything just seemed to go the way of the South Africans in the final.
Well, that's all we've got time for this week on Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph and Mitsubishi Motors. Thank you to my co-host Kyran Bracken, to all our guests throughout the tournament. Thanks to everyone who's tuned in, who's subscribed over the last 7 weeks, whether you're a regular or you've just found us. Make sure that you do subscribe, because we'll be back throughout the season. Our focus obviously turns to domestic stuff, Gallagher Premiership, Tyrrell's 15s, Champions Cup, Pro 14s, everything is there. And of course, the Six Nations is just round the corner, and we'll see how the unions bounce back from their World Cup campaigns too. Just remains for me to say, well done, South Africa, the Springboks, thoroughly deserved winners, deserve everything and all the plaudits you get. Goodbye.
Full Contact, in association with Mitsubishi Motors. Drive your ambition.